This is Community Builders, a Chico podcast where we look for the helpers and talk through some of the important work being done in our community. I'm here today with my esteemed guest, Tami Ritter. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for including me.
And now we can talk normally.
Okay.
Tami, thank you for being here. You are the county supervisor. Can you tell me a little bit about who you are and what that means?
Sure. Well, I'm a county supervisor. There's five of us. We represent the 5 different districts throughout Butte County. The majority of the area I represent is in Chico proper. It is, Trachtman, Mulberry, Boucher, the avenues, mostly where the student population is, and up to Northeast Chico. So I have a pretty diverse group inside the city of Chico, and I am the lone Democrat on a board of Republicans.
And what does a city supervisor do, or county supervisor? What are you supervising?
So the majority of our job is setting policy for the county, but the county is also responsible for public health, for behavioral health, for Butte County Sheriff's Office, our local jail, which all the municipalities within Butte County use, our probation department, our juvenile hall. All of those services have to come from somewhere, and that's the county.
I want to learn a little bit about you as a person.
Okay.
Can we go there next?
Sure.
What made you think about going into local government? How come you didn't pursue a different path, and what was the story like to get started there?
I would say probably a lot of naivety. Initially got me involved. I had been working exclusively nonprofit jobs, so I had been working directing the Catalyst Women's Shelter, and their actual physical shelter building was owned by the city of Chico. And following that, I worked as the founding director of the Chico Community Shelter Partnership, which is now known as the Torres Shelter or True North. So I had a lot of interaction with the city on building our building, on getting grants and funding and things like that. And then after the Torres Shelter, I went to work for Habitat for Humanity of Butte County for 2 years. So wrote a lot of grants and did a lot with getting permits and things like that with the city. And I was always amazed with the amount of red tape there was. And I kind of naively thought, well, I could do this better. And so,
Not so
I think that I had enough experience with the city that I thought I wanted to get involved on the policy side as opposed to being with an organization that was kind of at the mercy of those policies. And that's how I ended up running for city council in 2012. And there might have been a little bit of postpartum depression that also influenced that decision. I wasn't necessarily thinking 100% clearly. And that was the time when budget meetings would last 10 hours. I mean, we would literally be in the chambers until 1 a.m. They don't do that anymore. So there was a lot of fatigue that went into my first decision to run. But I did love serving. And when Maureen Kirk had told me that she was not going to run for county supervisor, in 2018, I decided that I was going to run.
And the rest is history,
as they say. The rest is history.
How was the campaign in the election? Was it easy? Was it something that you were able to just kind of put your name on a ballot? Did you do door knocking? What was your approach?
Well, my first campaign for Board of Supervisors was very hard fought, I would say, in 2018. And I had 2 individuals that I ran against, both who were somewhat more conservative than myself, but they were the ones that got all the endorsements: firefighters, law enforcement, Farm Bureau, all the really important endorsements for a county supervisor. And I ended up winning that election in the June primary. So that was encouraging, just that I didn't have to continue to run a campaign till November. And then the last election was after we had some new maps in the county. And so I will say that election was considerably easier because my district is what's called the packed district. There was a technique used for creating the maps that's called cracking and packing, and it is where they take all the Democrats and they put them solidly inside one district. That's my district, District 3. And they weaken all of the other districts surrounding it in terms of the Democratic vote. And so I have the packed district. So my second campaign was not as hard as my first campaign.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
And I could talk for the rest of the hour about that because I'm so interested in like the legality of that and like, can anything be done to reverse that and like set it back?
Well,
and is that something we want?
Well, I mean, I think we would want it because in terms of representation, our current county maps are not a good representation of our county. We're mostly, considered a purple 50-50, you know, we're kind of half red, half blue with a smattering of people who decline to state or are other parties. But there should be more representation on our board. So we were investigated. I don't know where that investigation stands from the Attorney General of California for our maps. And, we never got to hear any outcomes. But, some of the things we do know is that Fair Maps Act was not followed. Excuse me, it was more like a vague guideline instead of, the process we were supposed to follow. We weren't supposed to split up communities of interest. The lines were supposed to be contiguous when possible. You're supposed to have the least amount of representatives in an urban area as opposed to more representatives. So we have 4 Butte County supervisors who represent some part of Chico at this point.
Who's making those decisions? Is there a cracking and packing czar? Is there like
No, I mean the allegations, and I still believe this, is that these maps were gerrymandered, and they were gerrymandered by an operative of the Republican Party, and I know this because this particular individual actually showed me the maps prior to them becoming public and told me that my district was safe, thinking that I was going to somehow appreciate that, and I wasn't. And so when I went public with that information, it was not met with warmth and reception from folks on the cracking and packing side.
So you're the one who kind of broke that open.
Well, I think that you could simply look at the maps and you could see what was being done. But the other piece is that we had. There's a very specific process that you have to go through in terms of showing these maps to the public, allowing public input, and my colleagues voted on a map that had not been agendized. It was brought in at the 11th hour, and then we had to do a whole bunch of 2 special meetings to clean up Brown Act violations because those maps were not actually on the agenda to be considered.
Wow.
And so...
so they hacked it. They hacked the crack and pack.
They hacked the crack and pack, yeah.
Again, I'm really resisting the urge to just keep talking about that. I'm going to jump back though to you.
Yeah.
And your history, because I noticed some themes here with where you have worked prior to local government. It seems like you're drawn towards places and positions that you can help and that you can serve the community. It seems like you're not driven by, wanting a giant paycheck with these things. You're going to women's shelters. You're going to places that I think most people would agree make a real difference right away, firsthand, front lines in our community. And I'm curious, why? Why were you drawn to that stuff? Why aren't you a mountain biker or something that you could have done differently?
Yeah, professionally. I mean, it's a question I ask myself a lot too, because, as I'm getting older and I have a middle school kid and I'm starting to think about, oh my gosh, am I ever going to be able to retire? And if my kid decides he wants to go to college, am I ever going to be able to pay for it? So those are really good questions because clearly I didn't go down the path that would be an affirmative to, yes, I'll be able to retire before I'm too old to enjoy it, or you know.
Yeah, they're scaring me.
Yeah. So my advice to anyone listening is start thinking about your retirement before you're 50. But yeah, I'm definitely drawn to what would be considered the helping professions. And I think that, you know, you hear a lot about like work-life balance and those kinds of things. And I don't necessarily think that when I have been in direct service positions that I had a very good grasp of that. I think a lot of times the work I was doing, you know, pretty much prior to my son being born was very much, you know, I didn't have good boundaries around it, and I was giving more than was sustainable. And I think that that's a common theme with people who are drawn to the helping professions.
You cracked and stacked your personal priorities in the wrong. There's no metaphor there.
Yeah,
but,
I did.
And so, what sparked that? And do you think that is there like a moment you saw a wounded animal as a child? Is it just the way you were raised? Is this something that has just always been you?
Yeah, I think it's probably just, you know, just came out this way. I think I'm a very sensitive person, and so when I see other suffering, I want to do something about it, and that, you know, I think can be a little bit of a burden, and it can also not be productive, right? There's things that we can take on that, you know, seem insurmountable, or, you know, there's just this kind of endless pool of needs. So if you feel like you have to be the one to address it, it's not necessarily a healthy place to live in that for a long period of time. And I think that being in a policy position right now is a really good, it's a good way for me to be advocating for the things that I believe are important, and for the programs that I think are important, and for, you know, people who might not have a voice kind of higher up in the political process. And so that, you know, it kind of meets that need. And then, you know, where it doesn't get met, I take on other projects that that fill that part where I feel like I need to be of service.
Clearly, you're in the minority of people who are drawn to those things and actively run towards those crises. What is the obligation of like your average person that is in an okay place in their community, that they've worked hard, or life has been good to them, or they came out the gates with a certain amount of privilege? I always try to parse, at what point do you need to stop thinking about what you want and start looking around the world and seeing what it needs? And I'm trying to figure out where the question is there.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost like, is there an obligation for people to be a helper, or and I really think that people do it in the way that makes sense for them. And so I might even look at somebody and not even necessarily recognize the way in which they're a helper. And I think that that's one of the things that you have to, you know, like my dad and I are, you know, growing up, we were of very different political persuasions. You know, he's only very recently, you know, gotten a little less right wing. But his way of helping and my way of helping are different, but they're both necessary, right? So my dad can't stand to see, you remember those commercials they used to have on TV where like they would show people starving or in need, or, you know, he can't physically stand to see it. And his approach to being a helper is to make a donation. Right? And that hasn't always been the position that I've been in, where I can give money to the people who are helping. So mine has been to jump in and do what I can. But it doesn't make his version of helping any less valid. It's, you know, he's doing what he can do. And so, you know.
I love that assessment. And it speaks to, you don't have to help in the same way, and what part of you do you think, at what point did you realize that? And at what point was that like something you always knew?
No.
And how do we encourage others to get to that place where
Yeah.
you can accept that some people are just going to make a donation and aren't going to necessarily be the boots on the ground, or vice versa? If you're, I make huge donations if you're somebody like that,
Right.
and this person is simply standing in a soup kitchen, I'm contributing more. How do we reconcile those?
I mean, I don't think we even have to. Like I said, I might not recognize what somebody's contribution is, but that doesn't mean it's not there. And it's really not, just like it's not my job to judge how good a helper somebody is, it's not anybody who is out there helping's job to judge the people who are needing help, or, right? Like, I feel like that's where we get into trouble. So everybody has kind of their passions or their pet projects. And so I might not even my kid's not a sports kid. We don't go to soccer. We don't go to mountain biking. We don't do any of those things, right? But there are lots of parents that are involved in that are making it so that kids who can't afford their uniform, or they're bringing food to, games on Saturdays, or they're helping, right? There's different things that I would have no idea are even going on because it's not part of my world. It's not part of my circle. And so, but just because they're not donating to the same causes or volunteering for the same causes, it doesn't mean that they're not doing anything. And so I just don't feel like it's my job to tell them they need to get involved with this thing.
You touched on something else that was really interesting there, which is the not judging people who need help. And I think that's really interesting because it makes me think about what is our obligation to folks who aren't asking for help, and like how do we parse that? Because on the issue of homelessness, what I hear on, honestly as a take on all sides, is a certain percentage of folks are like down on their luck, need a leg up, are super happy to contribute to help themselves, and some aren't. And what do we do with people who aren't trying to help themselves, or are rejecting whatever parameters are put on the help that is being offered? And where does that obligation kind of start and stop?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think that unless somebody is to the point where they really can't take care of themselves, they are gravely disabled, or they're endangering theirs or someone else's life, I don't feel like we have the right to say, well, this service exists, so you have to accept it. That doesn't resonate with me. But there's also this point where do my rights, or whatever Joe resident's rights, and this other person, where do those rights butt up against each other? And so if I can't use the bike path because there's tents strewn across the bike path, and this is how I get to work, then this person living on the bike path, this is a problem, right? This has now become a problem for me and my life. And so I can understand when people are saying, we can't use our public spaces, or, we don't have access. If it's a public safety issue, right, or if it's a public health issue, those are the places where I feel like we have a right to intervene and, in some cases, impose, right? Because we don't want a hepatitis outbreak like they had in San Diego, right? We want to make sure that we are protecting everyone's public health. Yeah. So I don't necessarily think that there's a right and a wrong in that. It's unfortunately not a super clear, but I think the guideline I have to go in is, when one person's rights are taking over somebody else's. Yeah. That's where we have to look at. Yeah, you do have the right to not be housed, to not accept these services. You don't have the right to defecate on the public right of way.
Yeah, right.
So.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What is the disconnect with the approach to this stuff, where it seems to me like every time I really talk to anyone about it, enforcing public safety and doing that in a compassionate way kind of always resonates. Why are some people so far on one side or the other and away from that middle ground that I keep hearing as like the logical solution. Why? And I guess like we could ask about it on either side. Why are some people so adamant that like make it really hard for unhoused people so that they're miserable and leave or, you know, die or something? And some people are like, let's give them freed houses or whatever the very polar opposite of that opinion is. And how do we bring folks closer to a common sense, compassionate solution?
Well, I think one of the problems is that we do a terrible job of like tracking programs, people, outcomes, right? So we don't have good data that says, okay, if we do housing first, what we notice is that for the first 2.5 years, we don't see an improvement, but at year 3 and 4 is when we start to, like, we don't have any data. And every single time we implement a new program, because that's where the funding is, right, is whether it's housing first or transitional or, you know, wraparound services or supportive housing, whatever the local flavor of the day is for HCD and HUD, we implement a new program. Now we have kind of stopped this trajectory to see, okay, well, was the transitional housing program working or wasn't it? And so we're looking at it so short term because we're trying to deal with the current crisis or emergency that's in front of us that we're not taking a longitudinal look at this and going, okay, maybe this doesn't have great returns for the first couple of years, but by the time you hit year 4 and into year 6, it's fantastic, and these people are moving out of any type of supportive housing, and they're independent or self-sustaining, or, you know. So I think it's that a lot of times programs are having to chase the funding that's available, so they're having to change their models. And then as new research does become available, say from, you know, the federal government, you know, we didn't stick with something long enough to know, and our best practices change.
Really well said. What do you think? Well, wait. Let me get back one more step.
Yeah.
Are you from Chico?
No, I'm from outside Philadelphia.
From outside Philadelphia.
Yeah.
How long have you been in Chico?
I have been in Chico since 1997.
Oh, okay. So yeah, that counts as being.
I'm not native.
Yeah, but that's more than most folks can say. What do you think it is about Chico that makes this place worth fighting for, and a place that you want to help, a place that you are so interested in fulfilling these roles here?
Yeah, I feel like Chico is an easy place to kind of get involved with whatever the thing is that you're interested in or whatever it is that you're passionate about. I don't think it's that much different than any other college town. I really don't. I think that, you know, parts that make us unique is where we're located, that we're surrounded by ag. You know, when I've lived in other college towns, you know, they've had all the same similar issues in terms of homelessness or services or, you know, folks kind of falling through the cracks. You know, that's not unique to Chico, but I think any college town, you know, where you have people who are learning how to think critically, or you have people who are passionate about learning whatever it is that they're going to school for, and, you know, we've got a great community college. Like, there's just energy here, like there are in most college towns, and, you know, I think that once you feel that kind of sense of home, you want to make that home as good as it can be.
What do you think Chico should be more concerned about and isn't? Because you hear a lot of crime and like the safety things. I'm curious from your perspective.
I would say the number one thing that Chico should be concerned about right now is climate crisis. You know, we have had wildfires that have eaten up, you know, 25% of our housing stock between the Camp Fire and the Thompson Fire and the Park Fire. You know, we have a lot of climate refugees. So that is one area where I do feel like Chico and Northern California is unique, is that we are seeing impacts of climate disasters in terms of housing and, you know, as a cause of homelessness that we haven't seen since like Hurricane Katrina and some hurricanes on the, you know, on the East Coast. So I think that we need to be looking at, we need to be looking at the water in Northern California. We need to be looking at the things the state is doing in terms of the site's reservoir, because I don't know where people think that water's coming from, but it's coming from up here. I think that we need to be looking at, all of our fuels reductions programs. We need to be looking at where we are allowing growth, where we are allowing housing, where we are allowing development, and that's how our planning has to take place is where's the water going to be? Where are we going to be able to fight fires from? We need to be looking at our open grasslands and meadows as, ways to mitigate fire as well as regenerative, issues for our city.
Yeah, and that climate refugees, and, I won't try to pull statistics that I don't know for sure, but it impacts the housing crisis as well, right? We have like an abnormally inflated housing prices in this market because there are so many people here that can't afford to get in. What else? And
trauma. That's the other piece that, I feel like kind of as a nation, we're becoming more trauma informed, but we're not linking these climate crises. So all of these people who were living in Paradise and Concow and, Forest Ranch and had to evacuate, and these folks from, Berry Creek, and, not only did they lose loved ones, they lost their homes. A lot of them were fleeing for their lives, right? And these kids are now being brought up, with this kind of generational trauma. And so we have to be looking at about how that's going to impact all of our other systems, right? It's going to impact our behavioral health system. It's going to impact our public health system, right? We know from all of the studies that have been done from adverse childhood experiences that people who experience these traumas go on to have, they suffer with their behavioral health, they suffer with physical health. There's more cardiac issues, there's higher incidence of diabetes, there's actual health impacts that come from these kinds of disasters and being exposed to them that, I don't think we're going to see, how impacted we are again until 15, 20 years later.
Wow. Who do you think is doing some of the best work around fire mitigation in the area? Is it the feds and the fire department? Is it?
Well, our local fire safe councils, I think, are a real driver, particularly in fuels reduction. And so I've been really impressed with the work that they do, but it's all collaborative. They're working really closely with our Butte County Fire. They're working closely with CAL FIRE, who are our providers. They are, they're working with just residents who, maybe didn't come in with all of this information, but are learning about how to clear their property and how to have, evacuation zones and how to recognize where they need to be clearing brush and things like that. I don't think that the federal government is our friend in terms of helping us address this. And I don't think that, I don't think it's on state properties where we're seeing the best, assistance and practices to mitigate fire.
That kind of brings me to something I wanted to talk about next a little bit, which is why local politics and why is there a need to get back to being involved in that? Maybe paying less attention to national politics, or is that how you feel?
It is how I feel. I feel like I'm a bad political activist because when people ask me, "Oh, who are you voting for this office?" or on the state level or on the federal level, I want to focus on the seats that we can win. Right? And so if I know, let's just say for like an assembly or a Congress or some kind of position like that, if I can look at the demographics, right, in PDI or any other program and go, okay, even if every single person registered came out and voted, this isn't a winnable race, like if I could see that it was a possibility, I might be more inclined to be involved on those levels. But when we have positions that it doesn't matter how good of a candidate we don't have the numbers, my focus, my attention, my donations aren't going to go to those races. My donations and my, door knocking and phone banking, that's going to go to races that I think it's possible for us to win. And that includes, board supervisors, city council. Right now, school board is a great, we've got some great candidates running for school board. So that's where I focus my attention.
I want to ask about those candidates, but I also want to know about, can you maybe describe the ripple effect of like when you do have a strong, compassionate local government, does that affect the nation as a whole, and do more strong, compassionate local governments make a stronger federal government, or is that?
I mean, I don't know. Relation? I don't know the answer to that. I think even though I come from a place of like compassion and empathy, it's not a big part of my political advocacy, because essentially my job, I'm tasked with creating policy that spends the public's dollars in the way that is the most benefit to the most amount of people. And so if I have one program that I'm weighing against another, and this one costs less, but this one's more compassionate, or I have to look at whose dollars I'm spending, and compassion isn't necessarily the consideration. I'm not saying that I'm going to violate someone's rights or laws. I try to bring it down to be as objective as possible of what is the most amount of people that can be served, right, with these very limited dollars that we have. And, what does the research say, and what is the best way to go about getting these projects completed or these services offered. And so, the compassion piece, I think, comes in a little bit later when somebody's accessing those services, or somebody needs to, take advantage of programs that are offered.
What does a community that does a poor job of that look like?
Well, I mean, I would say if you're spending millions of dollars on a lawsuit to fight doing the right thing, then that's not a good look, right? Because those millions of dollars we could have used to build a building or rehab a building or come up with a solution, as opposed to just fighting having to provide services. Like that, I think that's an example of you're not doing it right.
Interesting, yeah.
Right? Because that's taxpayer dollars. And I think if you ask anyone who's paying taxes, would you rather that we rehab this building and we have a place where people who don't have a place to live can go? Or would you rather that we spend, $10 million on a lawsuit?
Is there any examples you can think of where we did rehab a building, or we did put that money in schools?
No, there's just no example. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. So I would say, one of the things that I heard about a lot before I was on the board was that the folks who were involved, either judicially involved or were involved with our behavioral health system, really wanted us to have what was called CIT, crisis intervention training. And so, we looked into a bunch of different ways where we could increase the amount of CIT training that our officers had, but also for our behavioral health workers and outreach folks and peers, that they could also have that training. And as we moved towards having more peer workers and creating our own, what we called mobile crisis, then it was like we were ahead of the state, right? And so we already had a mobile crisis team. So by the time the state caught up with us and they said, you have to have these crisis services 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, we already had a team in place. We were already working with all the different jurisdictions, and when we have enough people to fully staff so that we can send out 2 crisis workers on a police call, right? We still have the same requirements that if it's a 911 call, they have to secure the scene, but once they deem it safe for our behavioral health workers, we can have interventions on the behavioral health level that don't involve someone going to jail. And so I would say that's an area where we were kind of ahead of the curve, and we're still working on getting those positions fully staffed, because there's not a lot of people who want to work overnights, not a lot of people who want to work, late or on the weekends. And so we have to make those positions a little bit more desirable, I think. And so that's something I've been really pushing for, that we have site differentials, that we have pay differentials for folks who are working overnight shifts, but I'm one person, it's moving slowly, but it is moving in the right direction. And so I would say that, there's a recognition now that our law enforcement officers should not be the ones having to respond to behavioral health crises.
Yeah. Do you happen to know Advanced Crisis Solutions, ACS? They're a local behavioral health institution that's expanding rapidly. They seem cool.
I'll check them out.
Yeah. What's your favorite Chico restaurant?
My favorite Chico restaurant, probably Big Tuna.
Oh man, I love that place. What are your hopes for the future of this community, and what is our optimistic, best case scenario? What are we allowed to wish for without getting let down?
Oh, well, I think that a lot of my attention as of late has been kind of more focused towards kids, and what are we leaving them? What is our community that we're leaving them look like? I'm a foster parent, and I only take I have a small niche. I only take in the substance exposed infants.
I want to learn about that.
Yeah, so it's, for me, where I feel like my biggest hopes is in treatment, is that as a community, as a society, we stop looking at addiction as a moral failing, and we start to offer actual treatment where people can go and they can stay, and that, if they've made mistakes while they were, in the throes of their addiction, that we're not seeing people as, oh, you're just a throwaway person, right? That there's, particularly when it has to do with the disease of addiction, there's a way back. And, to say, oh, well, they just didn't go to meetings, when we know that AA and NA it works for less than 10% of the population, right? We need inpatient beds. We need actual treatment. We need treatment that is not religiously based, or that you have to follow some specific dogma in order to be there. So my greatest hope is that we learn as a community to recognize that this is a disease. We stop punishing and putting people in jail for it, and that we have services that are responsive to what our community needs, because I think that the opioid crisis with fentanyl, it's just going to get worse. And
100%.
Yeah.
Is there reason to be optimistic that that's becoming more understood, that, a lot of the people in the encampment are just J.D. Vance's mom, right? Going through that, and are redeemable and are not, a throwaway person.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. Is there reason to? I don't know. I don't know if there's reason to believe it, but you said, what do I want to hope for? So that's what I hope for. But I think that politically, that's a really big stumbling block between meeting in the middle, because the people on the far right are saying, well, you made this choice, right? And so you're here by your own choice, and you're continuing to use drugs, so you're clearly continuing to make the same bad choice. But there's a point where it's not a choice anymore, and it's not about, this person being morally bankrupt or whatever else. It's a very paternalistic view to say, you got yourself into this hole and pull yourself out of it, because, it's a privileged position to say that. Like, if I got myself in that hole, yeah, I probably could pull myself out of it, but that's because I've got a family around me. That's because I have resources. I have a job. I could get medical treatment. And somebody who is already at a deficit with those things, they don't have other people they can rely on to help get them out of a bad situation.
I want to ask about fostering.
Yeah.
May I?
Yeah.
How did you get involved in that?
So I had a friend who passed away, and she had 3 kids at the time she passed away that were under the age of 10, and I just wasn't sure what was going to happen. And so I got my foster license just in case there was any issue with what was going to happen with her kids. They have been able to stay in the home, and they're all doing pretty good. But while I was doing the training, there was a very persuasive social worker who worked for the county at the time who said, well, since you're going through this training, would you consider doing this additional training on top? And it was for the substance-exposed infants. And so by the time I got my license, they had a baby that was needing a home. And so, so I've been hooked since.
What was your reaction when she first asked about that other training? Where you're like, oh, no, but maybe? Or was it like I want to do that?
It was like it was. I mean, it didn't feel like information that could hurt, regardless of whether I ended up taking infants or not. And, it's in kind of my field of study. So I wasn't, I felt like, the more information, the better.
And so your friend's 3 kids under the age of 10 and then another infant?
So I never ended up having to...
They were able to stay in the home? They
stayed in their home.
But they were the impetus for getting...
They were why I originally went through the training. And so, I don't know if that was some kind of weird universal something. But I was like, okay, this is where I am now. And then as soon as I had my first placement... I was like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, right? And so that's what I was saying earlier, like the way that I am involved or the way that I kind of give back now looks very different. I'm not serving meals. I'm not, going out to encampments. But for, up to 6 months at a time, I have an infant that is, pretty much attached to me.
How many?
Nonstop.
How many infants have you fostered?
We've had 6.
Wow.
Yeah. So the shortest amazing. Was like 6 weeks, and the longest was 6 months.
Wow.
Yeah.
How does it feel to do that?
It's great while it's happening. It's exhausting, but there's always somebody who wants to hold a baby, so that's always nice. And then when I have to let them go, it's always a huge heartbreak. It's, and I always think, okay, it's not going to be as devastating this time, but it is every time.
How old is the oldest now?
She is over 3 and still in the system. She moved to a permanent foster home from my house, still in the system. And so also it's given me a glimpse into, a system that I'm very closely affiliated with through the Department of Employment and Social Services, and what it feels like to be on the other side, right? To be a foster parent, to be needing services for a child, and to have to be the person waiting on hold or at the doctor's office or wherever else, that the child needs to be.
Do you think that very persuasive social worker has any idea the impact she's made?
She definitely does, because she lives just a couple doors down, and so she knows every time I have another baby.
Wow.
Yeah.
How amazing.
Yeah.
How is that process from someone who knows absolutely nothing about it? So you have social worker, is like NLO involved? No
NLO, but public health is involved. You get a public health nurse. And then, there's a lot of tracking in terms of making sure that whatever health or behavioral or, kind of developmental issues have developed because the baby's been exposed to substances, that they're being addressed as early as possible. So it's a lot of appointments. It's a lot of, they do behavioral health assessments on kids that are 4 weeks old. And I think, wow, this is early. So, but they're looking more at developmental milestones than anything else, and whether the kid can be soothed or, if there's any irregular eye movements, things of that nature. So, yeah, I mean, it's labor intensive, but it is super rewarding. And I also have put, I talked about how previously my boundaries haven't been good. I've put some safeguards in place that in order to do what I'm doing as what's called an emergency placement, there's other foster parents out there that are what called foster adopt, meaning if this child is going to become eligible for adoption in the future, I want to adopt them. And I have not filled out the paperwork and turned in the paperwork that I need to be foster adopt because that's not, right? That's not what I want to be doing here. I want to be helping them out and then passing them to the family that's going to love them forever, whether it's their bio family or whether it's an adoptive family. I want to set them up for success. I fall in love with all of them. And so there have been multiple times when I've gone, oh no, should I submit my foster adopt paperwork? And then I know you didn't submit it for a reason. And so that's my guardrails I set up.
Good that you have those boundaries, because honestly, you're saving yourself from burning out and, saving more of your energy to do more of what is needed. Yeah. Just in case someone is watching and is interested, where do you even go? Where would someone who sees this go, you know what, I'm up to it.
Yeah.
I'm going to try that.
Look up Butte County Foster Kinship. It's Butte Glen Foster Kinship.
Butte Glen Foster Kinship.
Yeah, and there's a website, and, you can sign up, you can sign up just to find out more. Is this something I'd want to do? Is it not? And, I have a lot of people who were some of my respite people who I would have a long meeting for the day, and they'd watch the baby for me, and they are, going through the program now so that they can be official. And yeah.
That's really great.
Yeah.
We're in our final leg of this journey. And I want to ask, why is it important to have helpers in any community? Why should we encourage it? Why should we put the spotlight on folks who are helping, and how can we have more helpers? What are your inspirational words, your words of advice to maybe someone younger who wants to help, who knows that about themselves and maybe doesn't know where to start? Why do we need this in Chico?
Yeah, well, anywhere? I mean, I was going to say, I think we probably need it anywhere. Mm-hmm. I think the first thing I would do is say expand your definition of a helper, right? Because you could already be doing something that's helping, and maybe you want to do more of that thing. I think it's whatever your interest is. If you've got a kid that likes BMX biking, maybe you're going to help with, setting up the jumps, or, I don't know, right? If you love snuggling babies, you can, there's ways to do that at the hospital. There's ways to do it, with these options for recovery programs. If homelessness is the big issue, there's 101 organizations in Chico that are all involved in some different level. Maybe you don't want to go out to encampments, but maybe you want to be collecting food for food banks, or you want to be distributing, or you want to be, helping the folks at Catholic Ladies organize their pantry shelves, or, there's a billion and one ways to be a helper. And I would say that I don't know many people, regardless of political persuasion or regardless of what they're doing, that aren't helpers in some capacity. And so, follow whatever you're interested in. My kid loves cats, and he really wants a cat. And I am so allergic, and I do not want a cat. But we scoop poop and we clean, at what's it called? Friends United in Rescue, So he gets to play with cats, and, we get to be of a little bit of service at the same time.
I really appreciate that lens of find the thing that you're drawn to and
Yeah.
help around that. Tami Ritter, I'm so grateful you are in this community. I appreciate the work you do. Thank you for sitting with me today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.